Look, I come at an issue like that as an economist,
Yeah.
and I would say 99% of the economists I know are very opposed to these tariffs. It's a very inefficient way to raise revenue. It doesn't just raise consumer prices, it also applies to capital goods and inputs to industry. And we're already seeing it in the data. Inflation should have come down this year. Instead, it's been stable, and if anything, core inflation has risen. The growth has been slow in the first half of the year, and tariffs just doubled a couple weeks ago. So we're still early days in terms of their economic impact.
Yes, and I hear what you're saying about inflation could have come down, and we're still worried about the PCE and the CPI and the core, but it's nowhere near as bad as some economists had forecasts. I remember looking at a lot of economic forecasts talking about inflation skyrocketing, job destruction being more obvious, and apologies to our viewers because we have a helicopter landing. I'm sure it's the great and the good arriving, but in terms of the effect, I hear what you're saying, but it could have been a lot worse from what a lot of people are saying.
Oh, it could have been worse, but if you look at the good macro models, they were saying 0.5 point, 1 point off economic growth. That's what the investment banks were saying. That's what institutions like the Yale Budget Lab were saying. And so economists get really worked up about a point off growth. That's $2,000 for every household just being incinerated, and every year. And remember, again, the big tariff increases happened in August. We're not seeing any of those in the data yet. So some of this will grow. No, I don't think this is going to cause a recession. I don't think this is going to cause anything like the inflation we had a couple of years ago, which, by the way, was partly to overspending by a Democratic president. Absolutely agree with that.
Yeah.
But, we're moving growth in the wrong direction. We're moving inflation in the wrong direction. We're making everything harder for the Fed to manage.
Jason, politicians on both sides of the aisle agree on one thing, I think, when they're being quite candid, and that is that the size of the US deficit cannot continue because the expense on interest going forward is just going to be catastrophic, not only for the US economy, but on a global basis. But it's just going to really start hurting over the next 5 to 10 years as well. Is the administration doing anything that you can see that will get that deficit down and lower that expense?
The administration largely took a high deficit path that it inherited, some of it due to its own making from the first term, some of it President Biden, some of it all sorts of other people. They took that high path and have basically locked it in. They passed a law that cut taxes and cut spending. Then they did tariffs. All of that is roughly fiscally neutral. But remember, fiscally neutral says that we're okay with a budget deficit of about 6% of GDP rising to 7% of GDP. We're okay with debt continuing to rise as a share of GDP. So it's not that they've actively worsened it, it's more that they have accepted it and almost made it permanent.
But that acceptance, according to the CBO and others, I'm sure, is going to lock in higher interest payments and higher interest payments to a degree where it's going to cripple the US economy over the next 10 years, isn't it?
I mean, the problem is we always use words like cripple that probably overstate the magnitude.
Okay,
but we're
already spending more on interest payments than we are on defense.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things. There's the known, and that's a negative. That's higher mortgage rates, so it's harder for families to buy a home. It's harder for businesses to invest. And then there's the unknown unknowns. Where do you reach the point where it's too much? And we just don't know. The UK once borrowed up to 250% of GDP without a crisis. Argentina had a massive crisis when it only got to 40% of GDP in borrowing. Where is the United States in that? We don't know, but the point is you want to take out some insurance so that you don't have to find out the hard way.